Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof Show, live Newswire, June 16th. Man, we had so much go on the last week. Alex, you're back home. You've been on the road for a few weeks. I had to do a couple solos, I'm glad you're back. With last week, you're in Vegas.
But we did the one from Vegas. We did the one
from Vegas. And today, man, there is so much to go through. But before we get any further, I want to just highlight yesterday was Father's Day. Happy post-Father's Day. And, one of the things that we were talking about is there's a lot of it. It's like, yeah, you can be celebrated, but just the opportunity to spend time with your kids, to do those things is probably one of the greatest virtues of Father's Day. So everything aside, but where should we start in this news cycle? I mean, you give it and let's run with it, because there is so much packed into the last week, the last handful of days. Dude, there's a lot to unpack.
Let's start with the protests, because I feel like those are kind of winding down, and then we'll lead into the assassination, and then into the Israel-Iran war, basically, that's happening, and then into all the other fun stuff.
So we'll start with the ICE/No Kings protest. So last week on Wednesday, in many cities around the country, there were protests. The ICE office, Trump, the previous weekend, sent the National Guard into California to kind of contain the situation there. And really, as I look at it, protect the federal building, which in my opinion, he has every right to do. They weren't going out in the streets. They weren't a part of ICE raids. They were just standing guard around the federal building. And quite interestingly, and that's what they did in California. Here in the state of Washington, there was numerous accounts in Spokane and Washington where Antifa and other protesters were lighting over the weekend, just Saturday, Sunday, like 2 days ago, lighting the federal building in Seattle on fire, and no one did anything. No Seattle PD present, nothing. There was an ICE office the other day where there was Seattle PD kind of show up, shoot some tear gas, but the Seattle police chief is on record saying, I will not do anything. Arrest me if you must. I will not do anything. You see Antifa like blocking, there were people that were assaulted over the weekend that were just reporters, documenting what was going on with the No Kings protest. So what's interesting to me is how, kind of all, focuses on California being this bastion of, protest, but then I live in a state that is just as much engulfed. If anything, Seattle's and Portland are worse. Like there was a meme, there was a joke that people showed up in downtown Portland to like loot and raid, and all the stores are already vacant and boarded up because they're gone. They've been gone. And
I was going to say is that at the police chief of Los Angeles, at least you see him coming out publicly going, hey,
I need help.
Yeah, we need help. And then, so it almost seems like it shifted, like Seattle and Washington has become the mecca for ultra left-wing liberal movement.
And to the point where the governor is like, nope, I'm not going to do anything. A lot of the other leaders in the state, the top, I would say state leadership are like, no, we're not going to do anything. And they didn't. And, so then you look at the situation where I would say the more of us that don't want to be a part of it, it's like, how are we going to be protected? Like, why is the federal government not coming into Washington? Because I would say it is worse by far than what's going on in California in regard to destruction of federal property. All right. Let's transition here. Because Florida, you don't have any of this. New Jersey, you don't have any of this. It's like red, white, and blue. You just thought it was another 4th of July.
Well, and then Tyler, I think we were sharing this on Twitter, on X, when the police chief in Florida goes, we will run you over. Yeah. We will, it's like,
you point something at us, we're going to alert your family. We're to pick up your body. And that's what's like, interesting is like, they didn't come out super aggressive. Like the stories of, you heard about some people that got run over, and it's like, well, you know what, for your safety, carjacking, it's like, yes. Like there are reports of what happened in Seattle that someone abandoned their car and they ended up lighting it on fire and destroying it because all these protesters were surrounding them and they couldn't get out.
Right. It's like dude, if you have your you're driving, right, with your
probably
young
one of
in
your
the car.
largest, well, if you have your children, but you think about it, of your possessions beside your house, what's the next largest financial obligation that most
Very
people have?
expensive. Cars are very expensive.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that hit me, and I did some research, and I want to invite anyone watching either on live stream on LinkedIn or Facebook, or if you're watching the recording on YouTube, please, I want to hear from you. I want to understand. So the No Kings protest was essentially either created or driven by this ideology that, and this is what I gather, is that Trump is acting like a king. That's what I gather. That's what I understand. A tyrant. And so one of the things that I looked up and I've looked at this before, it's like, all right, what pieces of action are they this party that's opposing Trump and the current administration? What are they using to identify as authoritarianism? All right, that's first. Number two is, why is it fascist? And those are, like, when I search that and when I try to go, you can't find much that's not wishy-washy. They're like, well, you could, but yet there's just as much not. Mm-hmm. You could play it out to, oh, that's being fascist, where we want something to be very, homogenous in culture and everything else. You could point it to be that way, but then even so much I read this morning, I think I shared it with you, that the Italian president over the weekend deported an imam who was preaching to attack any non-Muslim. She deported him. He's been there for 30 years, and you're kind of like, do people in the U.S. not understand the freedoms they have? But there's also, like, when you look at domestic terrorism, there's kind of a fine line there. When you're inviting people to go attack someone of a different ideology and race,
right?
Man, that's wishy-washy. So back to the No Kings. It's kind of like, help me understand the way you see it as authoritarian and fascist.
It's okay. It starts with leadership. It starts at the top with media leadership as well as political leadership.
Okay, so let's just take them one at a time.
Yeah.
So media leadership. If we look at media leadership today, what has been proven the last 5 years, both in courts and public opinion? What has been proven of media?
They're manipulating and canceling voices, absolutely, and putting out false information
towards one ideology,
political party.
Yep. Yeah, and that's been proven in courts.
Yeah,
there has been numerous fines, like tens of 20s of 30s of millions of dollars in fines that have gone towards, not billions, millions, that have gone towards fines for certain media outlets because they have misreported. That has been documented. That's what's going on. And
it never gets corrected, by the way. You'll never see a reprint or
no. And so if we look at media in our society, we have to, whether you're left, right, center, it doesn't matter. Like, it's been shown that been documented in courts, in fines, that the media has not been truthful. It has been aligning with certain power brokers. Okay. That's number one. Next.
Second, political leadership. So between, and I don't know who your state's representatives are, but if we go, like Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, who's the other woman in California that said there was peaceful protests?
Nancy Pelosi. Yeah.
No, not the one that got barred from, remember, she was trying
Maxine
to go
Waters.
Maxine, so you have this left, and you have Waltz and all these people, right? That
you have the three governors, the New York, the Illinois, and the Minnesota governor last week that were under questioning by Congress and tore to pieces.
Yeah, tore to pieces. But there's no, it's all, why this regime and this president is horrible. There's no debate. There's no negotiation. There's no discussion. There's lies. Trump says he called him. Newsom says he didn't call him. Then they show the phone records, and it's like this back and forth banter of nonsense, right? And so you're
so in the leadership perspective, what you're getting at is there are leaders that are simply sowing a story and expecting everyone to go along with it. And if you don't go along with it, you're going to be excommunicated. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that would be a form of either fascist or authoritarian.
Yeah.
So like if you didn't agree with someone, you stood against it, they're going to just grab you and throw you in jail. If you break some
kick you out of
order,
the party or silence you.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to be tongue in cheek, but what we've just said pointed towards one party and one party only.
And you know, I don't know if you saw this, Taylor, but Bill Maher had Sean Penn on his podcast just recently.
Just recently, yeah, I saw clips of that podcast. I didn't see it with the actual interview segments with Sean then.
So it just goes to my point of like, there's no room for sit down with the guy, meaning the president,
which
have a
Bill Maher
discussion
did.
with
He
him.
went in,
Right.
you know, sat down with Bill Maher, with Donald Trump. He sat down with Charlie Kirk.
And that's what Bill's, you know, trying to explain to someone like Sean Penn, who's like, I will not sit down with this person. There's no way in hell. He's this, he's that. And all Bill Maher's like, have you met with him? You know, how do you know who he is based on what information? You've never met the man. Right?
Even Bill Maher said, I don't like him, but man, I have a greater appreciation for him because of the way that he treated me.
The willingness to just go there and have a discussion with him.
Yeah.
That's my point is like, are any of these people
willing to let's just file this
down?
away though in this conversation. What has I would say the political leaders that Bill Maher has aligned with over the last 20 years, we'll call it, what have they done since he sat down with Trump?
If anything, pushed him away.
Yeah, they've tried to excommunicate him. Yeah. You are not part of us. You are wrong for going and doing that.
Yeah.
Dude, I mean, again, the examples of authoritarian, I mean, it's just kind of shocking to me because, again, in this conversation, say, hey, if we were to ask people, and please, I want to hear your comments. Like, I don't have the answers. I don't know. I want to hear the perspective of why is Trump an authoritarian in your opinion? Why is he acting in a fascist way in your opinion? I just want to hear it. And what I have seen is most people don't even know. It's just what they're hearing being said. And so they are saying too.
I think it stems from the ICE raids and people, you know, saying, you know, people that did come here illegally, but that had worked, you know, and did not have criminal records are getting deported, which may be true. And I think, you know, Trump has alluded to the fact that there are farm workers, right, that he's trying to work out a bill or something to pass something so that people that have been working this country for many years on farms, because it was affecting farmers and their output.
So it's interesting. I can weigh in on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and you know, we're going to have a podcast later today where I think we'll get into a bit of that conversation because a lot of hand labor has been migrant workers. But I saw just on Facebook the other day, a publication that is mostly around dairy farming. And they were talking about, this is going on. And even if you use, there's something called E-Verify. So E-Verify is a software system that the government puts out that you can use to find out if someone's social security number, green card is legit.
Right.
Because if somebody walks in, you go to hire them and they have all the proper documentation. You're like, what am I to know? And there's this program called E-Verify that you're allowed to be able to, that you can use to verify. And the, whoever DHS, whatever said, no, that's not reliable. And so when you look at it from an agricultural perspective and a lot of employers, dude, you're at a loss because sometimes you just don't know. It's difficult, but that is what the industry, and here's the chances. So many, I would say, farms, hotels, other manual labor industries, construction, have gone to migrant workers as the predominant workforce for two reasons. One, they end up being a lot of referrals. Like, how do companies hire people? Man, there's a lot of referrals. You like working here. Hey, if you can find more employees that, you know, you want to work with, that want to work here, great. That's our greatest pool of employees and referrals. And that's any industry.
Yeah.
Number two is we've seen this for now a generation. Whether we go back to the conversation with Kent Russ to, you know, number of different guests we've had, is largely American citizens, American children have been told, it is below you to do physical labor. It is absolutely below you. And that kind of aligns with some of the sound bites of some of the people like, oh man, if we have these rates, who's going to, quote unquote, I am not lying here when I say this, who's going to wipe our asses? Or who's going to mow my lawn? Or who's going to clean my house? It's the kind of like, the different industries that are made up of, like, vastly made up of immigrant labor. And it's because we as a society have deemed that work to be below us. And it really shows a class system, and it's unfortunate, but yet that's why so many farms and so many construction, so many factories have predominantly had immigrant labor, because they're willing to come here and do whatever because they're better than where they came from. So
for sure,
that's the protests. No kings. It's amazing. I saw a report that they estimate 2 to 3 million people took part in these protests. And the comment back is like, oh, okay, that's about 3% of our population.
Yeah, if not, what are we at, 350 million?
Yeah, so 350 million, multiply that by 3, you're looking at, maybe not quite 2%.
Maybe, less than
2. And so you're like, okay, for a wild success. In, the comments, like, again, I come back to is like, please help me understand why people see it as authoritarian and fascist. I'm not saying that it's not possible. I just don't know. And that's where help me understand, give me the exact examples, as we've laid out examples that really seem confounding, because they're like, one party has done that the last several years.
Right.
If it's going on, I don't see it. Please help me understand it.
I mean, and the other part of it, and we don't have to get into it long, is just when the transition happened from Trump to Biden, and you had, what was it, the Jan 6 stuff happen at the Capitol, which was a day, right? And that was bad, and it was very heavily covered and talked about for years ongoing of what happened to those people. Then you go into, fast forward to just over the last week or two, these riots and the looting and the cars burning on fire. What Tyler, what's the differentiation between the two? It was one, I mean, these protests sound horrible. I mean, and then to be covered by they're peaceful and they're this and that, and then you're looking on your phone or on the news, and there's cars on fire, bricks being thrown, stores owned by immigrants, stores being looted and just destroyed. Like, how is that any different, and why is that not being discussed by all outlets and all media?
I think that's an interesting piece, because again, I was oblivious back January 6th of 4 years ago. 5 years ago now, when it was 40 years ago, just over 4.5 years ago. I had no idea, wasn't paying attention. It just was not part of, like, I mean, people were talking about it, like, I have no idea what happened, like why that happened the way it did. But one of the things that came out of it is that Trump was the one that incited it.
Right.
That's
what you're.
So and
who's inciting these?
Well, hold on. And what you see is when you see several leaders that are, and I'm talking the Tim Walz's, who was going to speak at a No Kings rally. Yeah. And, you have other nationwide leaders that are actively participating in these protests that end up turning violent and destructive.
Right.
Not saying they started it. And whether, going back to however the protest, the Jan 6, did it start peaceful and then turned into violent? Okay. I don't know. I wasn't haven't read up on all the details. And again, still, I know there's a lot of people that have been, those charges have been dismissed. Right. They've been, kind of let go. Like, it's like, all right, this wasn't really what we saw it to be. There was almost again, stories of the other party leadership just opening the doors and almost baiting people into doing destructive things. Yeah. Again, the story's very mired in what's the definition from one compared to the other of authoritarianism or fascism or inciting or not, because it seems like there's a massive double standard when you have judges that actively rule in one way who didn't rule in the way previously, when you have the Supreme Court that unanimously sides with the fact that, yeah, the president has the authority to do this stuff. Here's the other part. And again, I voted for Trump. I'll say it. That's fine. Whatever, right, wrong, or indifferent. Do I necessarily think he's no, it's kind of funny to see how it plays out. And it's like, the just baiting the media to absolutely embarrass themselves. Like some of the things on X that he said, it's just hilarious because he's even said it in interviews. Yes, I'm screwing with them because they're so ridiculous. I will continue to feed them lines just to make them look stupid. Going back to the Pope and the
meme.
Trump and gold emblazonment, whatever.
Yeah.
But the piece that I think is interesting in all of this is Trump ran on three pieces of his platform had three planks. Immigration. It was about border security, immigration. It was about cost of food.
Yeah.
And it was, the third, what was the third one?
It was oil and gas.
Yep.
Was it
energy costs?
Energy.
And so when you look at those three things, he's tried to work at all of them. He's tried to create peace in the Middle East. Well, that's got turned upside down a little, whatever. He's tried to create peace in Russia and Ukraine. That's been a little dicey. He's tried to, change economically through the tariffs, which he's gotten a lot of people to come to the table that were never at the table. So again, we're just a couple months into this, and he's trying to do a lot of things. And one of them he ran on and he's doing is to actively address immigration. And when I look at this and saying, okay, had everyone, his platform been those three items, planks those three items, and all of a sudden now he does something completely different, okay, that would venture to me to be authoritarian. Like there's states in this country who ran on I'm going to be very nonpartisan. I'm going to line with everyone. I'm going to make sure that we're more fiscally responsible. I'm going to hear all sides. And when the rubber met the road, when the time was to sign it, they completely party aligned. To me, that is authoritarian. Is when you say, yes, I'm going to hold the budget to I'm going to make sure we got to decrease our budget, and then to sign a budget that is $3 billion more of a deficit and sign on more taxes. That's authoritarian to me. That's a king. But I won't name the state Washington that did that. But anyways.
You live there.
I live.
You know best. You know better than most.
All right, so let's move on. I kind of allude to some of these skirmishes that are going on. Israel, Iran. Here's the thing that I really saw was interesting. This came out yesterday. Is that Israel wanted to assassinate one of the Iranian leaders?
Yeah.
And Trump's like, no, we're not going there. We're not going there. I'm not going to let you go that far because that is just total impending doom. Reading between the lines, that's what he was saying. Again, I think it is interesting. It's a little bit of his style of negotiation, and Trump's got his hands in all these pots. And it's definitely a different style of leadership than we saw the last 4 years, where I think most people would say Biden's approach was just kind of like, I'm along for the ride. I'm just going to try to smooth the waters. He wasn't a quote unquote leader in the directive.
Yeah. Didn't feel like he was hands-on with anything.
No. And I think most of the administration was just kind of like, oh, we're here to be here, right? We're here to just be a part of it. They were continuing to feed money at Ukraine. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but that's what their aid was. They weren't sitting down at the table saying, hey, how can we negotiate this? What can we do? And you see that in other places in the world. And I think it's very interesting that, some of the things that Israel is doing, and there's obviously a lot of people that aren't applauding it, but then you continue to see reports in Iran of a lot of their citizens. We had a Iranian refugee, Shermeen Cruz, on podcast a couple months ago, and she shared stories about when she was a young girl some 30 some years ago in Iran. And you see essentially kind of the example of that. I have another friend, Hanaya Saguri, who was Iranian, I would say refugee, left Iran, and these stories of complete oppression. And now you see examples of people in Iran that are applauding.
Yeah, I think
what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if I was shocked. You never want war, right? But
No,
and I don't want the U.S. to get involved with what is happening there.
No, our involvement right now, I think, is okay.
Yeah, we're similar to Ukraine. Like, we supplied Ukraine with weapons. We've always supplied Israel with weapons. Like, okay, but
we don't need boots on the ground.
No, like after what happened with Iraq, which was a very weapons of mass destruction, increased enrichments of uranium, right? Very similar, kind of storyline, right? That's why Israel said they said that they attacked because they saw within months Iran
an impending
nuclear capability. So they said that they needed to act. I liked the stance of like, hey, Trump. What Trump had posted is that he warned Iran of what could happen. It did happen. Now there's a back and forth skirmish. I don't obviously know how this all comes to be, but Iran has always had, not always, but for a long time has had these dictators, right, in their countries where a lot of people want to leave and get out because they're so focused on military nuclear capabilities. The people get left in the dust, right? And it's all focused on how do we bolster our military, so we can, have our, personal,
more power and to use it quite honestly, authoritarianism, like dictatorship and just supreme rule.
They're literally called the Ayatollahs, the supreme leader of the country. That Khamenei, that's what you were mentioning earlier. I mean,
so it would be how this plays out. I think is interesting. Again, knowing how much the U.S. is involved yet not involved. We have all. I saw this. It again is interesting because I think it goes very much back to it sounds good, but I really don't know what it means. And, several people have brought this up. I think going back to the individuals like Bill Maher has brought it up. You see a lot of these college protests, free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. And there's one gays for, Palestine. And there's people like, and I saw this, it was like, maybe the next reality TV show should be someone that has that wants to embrace the free Palestine. Go live there. Go live under their control and regime and just understand what it's like. Because again, I think it's very misinformed. Share a story.
Shoot the reality show there.
Well, yeah. I mean, you see I think this has shown up on X, that there's a lot of Gaza protesters that went to Egypt and were trying to go to Gaza from Egypt, and they were essentially accosted and thrown in jail. And like, we're not going to have that here. We don't do that here. And much to their surprise, because I think this Western world has allowed so much freedom, and you go to these other parts and you're like, oh, well, I'm expected to have this freedom because we live in 2025. And it's like, no, you don't. Not one bit. Not one bit.
That's a good point. All these like Antifa No Kings protests. Good luck if trying to do that in Iran and in Palestine, Jordan.
Well, even in Italy, like I make the mention about, the Italian president that this Amon, who is kind of like essentially what I gathered in the little clip, who was saying is like, hey, go attack people, right? Based upon, and she's like, no, you're gone. We're not going to let that here. And so,
hey, bud,
we got a visitor.
We got a visitor. I'm working. I'll be there. I'll be there soon. Okay.
So, how this plays out, I think, will be interesting. But again, this idea of this ideology of what freedoms we have aren't free enough, and it's like we got a lot of freedoms, and to really understand and appreciate the freedom you have, go somewhere where there's no freedom.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and you have to travel. I think going and traveling and seeing these things, but firsthand is the route to go. But the way of which this war goes is uncertain to me. I hope it can de-escalate quickly. I don't know if it will, just given the history of these countries and all the things that have taken place over the last few days, honestly, because these missiles and these strikes just happened over the last 2 days. And you had retaliation from Iran. They sent missiles that did hit Tel Aviv. So you had missiles that struck and hit Tel Aviv. So I think it's going to kind of escalate before it de-escalates. Unfortunately, I hope that the U.S. and that we stay out of it. I don't want to get involved in another conflict. We somehow stayed out of Ukraine, Russia for enough time, which is another thing. I mean, I'm just reading up about Ukraine, Russia. They can't make a deal, and
No.
Russia's gonna want territory. Eastern parts of Ukraine. They're going to want them to demilitarize, destroy all the weapons that they did receive. They don't want them to be able to join the EU and NATO and all those things. So you're at it. They're not going to agree to those terms either. So, and then with Iran and Israel, like how does that de-escalate? I mean,
it's going to be at some point where I really wonder is, again, Trump has stated that he didn't want to let Israel go and assassinate the Iranian supreme leader. What happens with that? I think that is going to be very telling. And does that bring them to the negotiation table, or are they going to double down on we're against everyone? I think that's what's going to play out there. So talking about assassinations, let's pivot to the other big news that hit us on Saturday morning here in the U.S. The state representative, Melissa Hortman from Minnesota, that was assassinated, as well as her husband. You have the state senator as well, who was injured with his wife.
And the guy's been captured since.
The guy was captured last night. Here's where it's interesting. We saw within the last week or so, the Colombian candidate for president that was assassinated. We have this turmoil in our country. If we go back to last summer, almost nearly a year ago, 13 months or 11 months ago, with the first assassination attempt of Donald Trump. One thing that is interesting is we see everything in the snapshot of where we are. Right. We see the protests, we see the violence, we see all of this going on. And one thing that is always stopped to remember, the 60s had just as much, if not more. In a short time period, we saw Martin Luther King, we saw John F. Kennedy, we saw other assassinations in the world. And a lot of that was centered around racial equality and rights. And I really wonder if we stop and look out of it, if we go back just a few days ago, he was in DC, and right now, whether he likes it or not, Tim Walz is front and center in this deal. Front and center. It's all on him. And, he was in DC and he denied and just pretty much, I don't want to say played dumb, but a lot of the questioning was like, dude, you got to take some ownership. Like, you have caused a lot of this, and going back to the George Floyd and the chaos that was in Minnesota that looked a lot like what happened in LA a week or so ago. And now it brings right to your doorsteps. And if you want to, as there's many people trying to partisan wise point fingers, what he cannot deny is this person has been a part of his administration. Can't deny it.
Right.
This guy was a part of his administration. And one thing's on the heels of, if you saw, I'm really wondering if now it's, one thing I've learned is, especially in leadership life, is you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only do it looking in, the past.
Right.
And there was a video of her, I think just on Friday. I may not be right on the date. It could have been a different date, but very recent, just a few days ago, where she was being interviewed because she was a leader of the representatives in the state, and she voted against healthcare for illegals. And part of her voting against, and what she said in this interview, was that I'm kind of fearful. Like there's this absolute hesitation. There's this insecurity that she's expressing. And now to look what happens just a few hours later,
Right.
And you wonder, all right, how much was she being actively threatened? And then you come back to Walz. If this was going on under your watch as governor,
Right.
you got to take some ownership, buddy. Like, you are going back to the J6 and Trump, and they wanted him to take ownership. There was not an assassination, luckily. If somebody had come in and assassinated some of the senators in, DC, yeah, there's some culpability. Didn't, and here we are, Tim Walz, and you want to shirk everything, and you want to kind of push away, and you want to point fingers at Trump. And it's like, whether you're saying he was a different party or not, he worked in your administration.
Yeah.
And it was one of your representatives and one of your state senators who were targeted. Where are you going to take ownership and just absolutely get in front of this? That's what's going to be real leadership.
Well, why don't they? Like, what is in you? I'd love to just hear your take on this. Like, why deflection, pushing, passing the buck, pointing fingers? Like, is it just that hard? People can't do it, and they just don't want to take on that load.
A close friend of mine is retired as an officer in the Marine Corps. Pretty high level. It done some pretty significant missions. And one of the things that he shared kind of with my friend group as we were talking about different things over the last few weeks is like, man, it's amazing how some of this is playing out, because talk about seeming scripted. Now, this is an individual that has seen much higher level clearance on our protection in our country than I. And then you start looking at the actions of a Gavin Newsom, of a Karen Bass, of a Nancy Pelosi, of a Tim Walz, of a Kamala Harris, of a Chuck Schumer, of a lot of these leaders within that party, right? And you have an individual like Bill Maher who was in their nest, right? In their nest, and then said, all right, I get invited. I'm going to go be a journalist. That's what I think he did. And he changes his tune, and then you look at everyone else and like, person that supposedly considered joining the Republican Party, a person that voted against what all the party line leaders wanted, ends up getting killed. And now all of a sudden we sit here and we say, the governor in Washington could stand against. Nope. Doubling down. The police chief in Seattle. Nope. Doubling down. The leadership in California and Oregon. Nope. Doubling down. You see all the three governors that were in Congress last week for their interrogations, their questioning. Doubling down.
Right.
And you continue to see this double down on the story. And there's no, John Fetterman's the only one really as we've seen as a senator, a leader within the party that has kind of said, this is all BS. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing his words. He probably said pretty similar to that. I mean, Fetterman's kind of like sweatshirt and just, all right, guy. I don't think Walz has the guts. Yeah. I don't think Walz has the internal fortitude. I think Walz has been a mouthpiece, and that was shown much during the previous election. And we'll see if it's different. But he is in prime spot to say, yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And seeing and rightly so. I mean, someone that he's probably worked with, campaigned for, everything, and they get assassinated, he can't but think, oh shit, am I next? But then all of a sudden you go to Tim. And man, I sure hope over the weekend, I sure hope, and I can see him doing it. Mr. Trump, President Trump, picking up the phone and calling Tim Walz and saying, hey, man, I'm sorry. You have our resources to protect any representative. We don't do this. And I could see him also saying this. It's scary when bullets start flying at your head, Tim, and hang up. How impactful would that be?
Yeah.
Because for someone who's so venomous, and I have no, like, I don't know, I'm just making up a story, but man, we've seen him do it in other ways.
Yeah.
For Trump to pick up the phone and say, absolutely, we will not stand for this. You have the complete resources of the Secret Service. And Tim, scary when bullets start flying at you.
Yeah.
Because he never saw that. And yet he wanted to say he saw it. And there's so many deep storylines in that, but it's kind of like, for someone who is just, I'm trying to think of a movie, those movies where, you have kind of like the supreme leader, and then they send out their, it's going to hit me and I'm going to remember.
Yeah.
And again, this is I'm not trying to whatever with Walls, but Walls, dude, you're front and center in this story now.
Yeah, he is.
And you have the opportunity to take a directive turn. You have two people that were a senator and his wife that are fighting for their life as last. You have two people that are dead. 4 people in your state because of the political turmoil we're in. If you don't stand up and take ownership, then when are you ever? Plain and simple. It's right now.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to, I could see it happening where President Trump picks up the phone and say, Tim, what happened is absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
You have full resources. And at the same point, Tim, it's a little scary when bullets start flying at you.
Yeah. And Trump's known for that. I mean, I just saw come across, he's meeting now or met just maybe within the last hour or so with the new prime minister of Canada.
Oh, yeah.
He goes to the table with, before was like, we can't talk to him. He's the worst. And then all of a sudden, they're having a meeting and, discussing.
Well, but I mean, that's what he understands. And again, I think that's a difference in leadership that maybe we didn't see, and again, you and I've talked about this, as my mentors have said, he's not a leader. I would venture to guess he is displaying a greater point of leadership now than he did in his previous term.
Yeah.
Partly because of this. He is who he is. We've talked about that. New Yorker. You spit in my face, I'm going to spit back and then flip you a bird. Right? And that's what Trump is doing. And that's that's Northeast. You go to Boston and they respect you for that. Your mom back at you and all right, let's go have a drink.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the nature of it. And it's not the difference when you go to the other side that is fake and lie and, oh man, you're the best. And then you turn around and say, I can't stand that guy. He's a complete POS. That's what's going on in Sacramento because that's what they do. Plain and simple. You and I have lived in both parts of the country, and I think we could share a story. That's the difference. All right. Yeah. And when you look at that to say, all right, we may disagree, but man, I better get in there and get involved because this just can't happen otherwise. So I'm going to get in on it.
Yeah.
And I think he did a much better job this term of putting people in place and saying, it's not my job. Do it. You do the job. He's done that with his cabinet, right? He said, I don't know. These guys do that. Not me. It may not look like what we have such a disenfranchised view of leadership in this country. A friend of mine, and we're going to wrap up. We're getting a little long, but I think this is good. A friend of mine sent me an article over the weekend. And there was a lady who is I don't know her exact title, but CEO or a leader within a very large healthcare company here in the region. Mm-hmm. And in this article, she shared about, having an empathetic, a caring, a embracive, vulnerable style of leadership. And I'm reading, I'm yes, that's what our world needs. And she laments this lady, and she's probably, I'm going to guess, in her 60s. I have no idea. Maybe she's younger. Maybe I don't know. Right? She could be in her 50s. Right? But she's a she's a lady with experience, meaning she's not 25, right?
Yeah.
And she shares in this article about how for years she was told, you can't lead like that. You can't lead like that. You have to be, which I've heard from so many women and so many, you have to be the bulldog. You have to be intense. They'll take advantage of you. You have to be an asshole, essentially. And it's like, no, that is not leadership. And I think that's where very much in our world politically, we don't know what a good leader should and looks like. We don't. And yet we're falling onto the narrative that's saying whatever style leadership is not by the power brokers is wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting to continue to watch.
It is. It's been I mean, can you think about it? It's only June 16th. I mean, this is 6 months into the year. But I think to your point, I mean, my last thought here is like, you said this months ago. I think this year is going to be a tough one. And we're continuing to see that it is on a global level, different battlefronts, unfortunately, assassinations in the U.S., protests, we just started summertime. The market seems to have a dip and then recover. I mean, it kind of back and forth, up and down.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think, this year is going to be tough, and it's when early.
We lost you. Can't hear your mic.
Oh, am I gone? How about now?
No, now you're back.
Okay. What was the last point thing you heard me say?
Just keep going.
Okay. So just to your point, though, I think we're going to see a lot of still turmoil this year, and we really won't see, like you mentioned, inflation, border control, immigration, energy. Those things seem to get solved or figured out till probably sometime Q1 of next year, which is what you alluded to many months ago. And I think you're right. I think that's kind of this year's going to be a tough one. 6 months in, it is complicated, and a lot of things happening globally and here in the U.S. So we just gotta keep fighting through it, and hopefully that we can get through it together safely as best we can. Not get into any wars. Figure out some peace. Figure out jobs. Figure out home prices and inflation, and get to that golden age of America, because I think that's what people also are. And
well, here's something that you brought up: stock market. Yeah. I don't follow the stock market every day, give or take conversations. The stock market is roughly 10% higher than it was exactly a year ago. Boom. The dollar index is roughly 20% higher than it was a year ago. It's just interesting points. That's it. But thanks for joining. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, wherever you're at. I would love to have this conversation with you. Again, how do you see it as authoritarian, fascist, this way or different? Please weigh in. And then also, what's your view of leadership today? Those are 3 questions I leave you with. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking time to spend a little bit with Alex and I. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.